Welcome to my YouTube channel. Once upon a time in Arato, there lived a nun called Ezin, who the villagers highly respected. No one knew about her past life. All they knew was that she walked into their village at a time when she was desperately needed. "Who are we to question a servant of God?" one chief said to another. "I believe God has sent us help. Remember, our priest passed away untimely," the other responded. So, after deliberations, they gave her the hut which she had to share with Mom, the late priest's orphan moms. The two ladies quickly became friends, like two peas in a pod. One day, Ezin revealed a secret to Mom, which all the villagers were itching to know but were too scared to ask. "I am a princess. My father is the great King of Ukali," Ezin told her as they ate their meal. Mom was shocked by this discovery. She had always thought Ezin carried herself with grace, but she never attributed it to being a princess. Ezin refused to tell Mom her full story, but she promised she would tell her all she needed. One day, oftentimes, Mom would wonder how the princess of Great Ukali had become a nun, but she refused to ask more questions, fearing she might scare her friend away. As time passed, Mom began to worry less about Ezin's secrets because she had another concern. She became jealous. The villagers gave Ezin more special treatment than they ever gave Mom's late uncle. You see, the villagers believed Ezin was sent by God. After all, how else could they explain a nun walking into the village on the same day their priest suddenly passed away? They thought God had saved them from the burden of finding another religious leader by sending Ezin just when they needed her most. At first, Mom thought she was okay with all the compliments Ezin received. But when the villagers began to visit Ezin with gifts, asking her to pray for them, Mom's heart grew angry. Why did Ezin always have the best life, both in her past and present? As a princess in the past and now as a nun, Ezin was still treated like royalty. Although Ezin shared everything she had with Mom, Mom could not reconcile the bitterness she felt. One day, Mom plotted something terrible against her friend. She connived with dangerous men who agreed to kidnap Ezin and return her to Ukali for ransom, which they would split equally. On the appointed day, Mom asked Ezin to go for a walk with her, and Ezin innocently agreed. As they walked farther from the village center, Mom's heart danced with joy, knowing Ezin would soon be out of her life, and she would become rich. Finally, they reached the spot where the kidnappers were hiding. Mom began to cough loudly, signaling the men to emerge. They grabbed Ezin, and, to Mom's shock, they grabbed her too. "Where are you taking me? This wasn't the plan. Let me go," Mom screamed, but the men refused. They didn't want to risk Mom exposing their secret to the villagers later. They planned to return Ezin to Ukali and sell Mom to merchants overseas, where she would work as a servant for the rest of her life. Both women were carried to a large boat with other prisoners. 2 days later, the kidnappers stopped to pick up more men from another village. One of the new men recognized Ezin. "How are you alive?" the man asked, astonished. The leader of the group was confused, as he didn't know anyone on board should be familiar. The man pointed at Ezin and laughed. "How did you end up with this stupid woman?" The leader, offended, told him to show respect as she was a princess, and they would earn a great ransom. The man laughed even harder. "Princess? Who made her a princess? We're from the same village, and she disappeared after causing so much trouble." What Mom and the men didn't know was that Ezin was a chronic liar. She had been a maid to the real princess, which was how she learned to act gracefully. Before arriving in Arato, she came across a nun lying lifeless on the ground. Thinking the woman was dead, she took her uniform and claimed her identity. It was only by coincidence that she arrived in Arato at a time when they desperately needed a religious leader. The man continued to explain to the leader, "She was notorious for spreading lies in our village, but the king allowed her to serve the princess because her late father had saved his life." Eventually, her lies endangered the entire village, leading to an invasion by a neighboring village. "As you already know, my village is ruled by another king. I do not know how this mad girl managed to escape," the man said, this time very angrily. Mom couldn't believe her ears. She looked at Ezin, who had her head bowed in shame. "Please, just let me go," Ezin begged. "I promise I won't tell anyone what happened here." Mom began to cry loudly. How did she get herself into this mess? She looked at Ezen with anger, but Ezen didn't care. She just wanted to leave. She prayed silently to God, trembling with fear. Please God, if you save me this one last time, I promise to be a better person. No more lies, no more rumors, Ezen said in her heart. The leader of the kidnappers gathered all his men for a meeting to decide their next move. All their plans of getting a huge ransom in gold were gone with the wind. Eventually, they agreed to sell her to merchants like the other prisoners on board. But there was a slight problem. While Ezen was asleep that night, Mom conspired with other prisoners to beat her up. By morning, Ezen's life was hanging by a thread. When the men saw she was close to death, they decided to abandon her by the seashore. She's not our problem anymore. This woman is bad luck, one of them said as they left her there. Hours passed, and Ezen lay praying under her breath for God to send help. But nobody came. She cried weakly, and just when she was about to give up, she heard a man and a woman talking as they approached. Is she alive? The woman asked the man. I don't know. Let's take her to the herbalist, the man responded. When Ezen heard those words, she closed her eyes, relieved that help had finally arrived. 2 days later, Ezen woke up to find a woman around her age and the herbalist standing in front of her. You scared us. I'm happy you're awake, the woman said. My name is Olachi, and my brother and I brought you here for treatment. What's your name? Ezen remained silent. Did you hear her? What is your name? The herbalist asked again. Ezen thought deeply. Just as she was about to reveal her real name, she remembered Arado and all the gifts she had received as a nun. Then she recalled her prayer to God, asking for a second chance. Just one more time, God. I just need to get all I can from this village, and then I'll move far away and start an honest life, she thought. So, although she knew it was wrong, Ezen created another false identity. My name is Amara, and I am a nun, she said slowly to Olachi and the herbalist. She began to spin more lies, telling them how she had been mistreated by villagers who hated her because of her religion. Despite the miracles she performed for them, they sold her to merchants, she said, with tears in her eyes. Olachi comforted her, but in her heart, she was excited, because she believed God had finally answered her prayers. Come stay with my brother and me until you can get back on your feet, she quickly offered. You see, throughout Olachi's life, she had never experienced her menstrual flow, and this troubled her deeply. She had sought help from many spiritual leaders, but none had provided an answer. Her condition bothered her so much that she turned down all suitors, believing she would never be able to give them a child. In her heart, she thought Amara was her solution. All she had to do was accommodate her, and eventually, she would beg Amara to perform a miracle for her. When Amara heard Olachi's offer to accommodate her, she gladly accepted. But just as their conversation ended, Olachi's twin brother walked in. When Amara set her eyes on him, she was love-struck. She had never seen a man so handsome and quickly regretted identifying herself as a nun. Olachi smiled at her and said, I'm happy you're awake. When my sister and I found you, we feared you were dead. Olachi made an introduced and told him the nun would be living with them for some time. Out of respect for his sister, he agreed. As time passed, Amara settled into her new home. The king of the village learned of her presence and permitted her to stay. Word of Amara's supposed miracles in Arado spread through the village, and soon people began visiting her with gifts, seeking her prayers. Olachi treated her with great love, hoping that by showing kindness to God's servant, she would be blessed with her menstrual flow. Amara continued to deceive the people, making them go through various spiritual exercises, promising that their prayers would be answered. When no answers came, she would say, I believe God wants you to give more, and the desperate villagers would bring even more gifts. Despite all the wealth and gifts she enjoyed in the new village, Amara was unhappy because she desired Olachi's love. She tried everything to get close to him, but nothing worked. Although she was beautiful, Olachi's regarded her only as God's servant. One day, Amara became desperate for Olachi's attention, so she planned to make herself special in his eyes. You are a well-raised man. Any woman would be blessed to marry you, she said to him. Then she paused for a while and added, Maybe, just maybe. Amara immediately stopped speaking, but Olachi, curious to hear what the nun wanted to say, asked, maybe what? Amara took a deep breath and responded, Olachi, maybe in my past life, I would have been happy to be married to a man like you. Although Olachi was uncomfortable with the conversation, he was intrigued by what she meant by her past life. What happened in your past? He asked. Amara remained silent for a while, then began to spin lies. Olachi's, you must promise not to tell anyone what I'm about to share with you, she said. Olachi's nodded in agreement, and Amara continued, I am a princess. My father is the great King of Ukali. Olachi's looked at her in surprise, clearly shocked. Amara told him how her father hated her decision to become a nun and how she had turned down princes from other communities. She claimed she eventually had to run away from the village when her father threatened to marry her off to an old king. Olachi, just maybe if I had met someone like you, I would have married you instead of becoming a nun. The men I met were all so proud, Amara finally said. She stared at Olachi, hoping to see great admiration and affection on his face, but his expression remained blank. After a long silence, he said, well, you are a nun now, and I'm sure God has great plans for you. Amara boiled with anger at his response. Later, Olachi's excused himself, saying he wanted to go to bed, but promised her that her secret was safe with him. Days passed, and Amara noticed that Olachi's remained distant. He didn't even try to be friendlier with her after she mentioned being a princess, which upset her deeply. One day, an opportunity to get closer to Olachi presented itself. Olachi informed them that she would be going to the neighboring village for a few days, and Amara decided it was the perfect time to make advances on Olachi. When the compound was empty, she entered Olachi's hut and put some sleeping herbs in his wine gourd. She knew Ono had a habit of having a drink outside his hut in the evening. When Olachi's came out as usual, Amara sat next to him, and they conversed while he sipped his drink. As expected, he began to feel very sleepy. Olachi struggled to stand, but when he realized it was impossible, he reached out to Amara for help getting back inside his hut. Amara supported him and carefully laid him on his bed. Then she lay beside him and took advantage of his weakened state. When she was done, she rested her head on his arm, feeling a sense of triumph. The next morning, Olachi woke up to find Amara lying in his arms. Fear gripped him as he realized he had committed a grave sin against God. He immediately rolled out of bed and left the hut. Later that night, he tried to sneak back into the compound without alerting Amara, but when he entered his hut, she was waiting for him. Why are you avoiding me? I know you've been staying away because of me, she said. Olachi avoided eye contact, ashamed of himself. Amara, this cannot happen again.
You are a nun, he replied.
Amara countered, suggesting that maybe this was God's way of indicating she needed to get married. But Olachi's wasn't convinced. He immediately began packing a few of his things. I don't know how we ended up together last night, but we need to give each other some space. I'll be back when my sister returns home, he said. Amara tried to stop him, but he refused. As she watched him leave, her heart broke because she was in love with him. 5 weeks passed, and Amara became very ill. Olachi went to the marketplace to get some herbs. Amara felt so sick that she ran outside to vomiting. As she was throwing up, Olachi walked in and rushed to help her. Despite her illness, her heart warmed at his gesture. Since the night they spent together, he had only spoken to her when his sister was present. He helped her sit just outside the hut, then brought some water to clean her face. Olachi, I've been meaning to talk to you, Amara said, weak and tired. Olachi tried to dismiss her, knowing she wanted to bring up the night they had spent together, but Amara wasn't having it. Olachi, I am pregnant. I am carrying your child, she screamed. He froze his shock. Just when he thought he had moved on from what had happened between them, another issue surfaced. They both sat in silence for more than 5 minutes before Olachi finally spoke. Amara, I will marry you. That is the only way to solve this issue. We have to go to your father so I can get permission to take your hand in marriage, he said calmly. Amara became scared. She was not expecting the situation to escalate in that manner. No, the king will not be happy with us when he finds out. I am pregnant, he might have you arrested, Amara said to Olachi. Olachi's thought for a while, but couldn't come up with another solution. However, Amara had her own plans. We can relocate to a faraway village and start fresh, she suggested. She also mentioned that some villagers had organized a prayer event where she would offer prayers to God for them. They will bring a lot of money and gifts for me. We can take all of that and start over in another village, she added. Olachi initially refused, feeling the plan was morally wrong. After all, he was a hard-working man who had managed to acquire some wealth for himself, so he was more than capable of taking care of Amara and the baby. However, Amara convinced him it wasn't just about the gifts. Olachi, let's just say the prayers I offer will be my way of saying thank you to the villagers, she persuaded. Eventually, he agreed to give her time to wrap things up with the villagers. Afterward, they would inform his sister, Olachi, before relocating. Time passed, and preparations for the prayer event began. Some villagers, including Olachi, fasted and prayed in advance, hoping that God would hear them through Amara. Olachi took care of Amara to the best of his ability to ensure their baby was in good health, and Amara cherished every moment. She could not wait to start her family with Olachi. One day, Olachi went to check on Amara, but he was shocked to see Olachi sitting in Amara's hut, holding a piece of cloth. He hadn't realized his sister was home and jumped in fear at the sight of her. Olachi, I came to meet the nun for prayers, he stammered. But Olachi was too sad to notice his discomfort. Soon he noticed his sister was crying. Olachi, concerned, asked, Olachi, what happened? Why are you crying? As he held his sister. Olachi began to cry loudly. Why am I different? Even people who don't need it have it, she said through her tears. Olachi was confused. What do you mean? He asked. Olachi opened the piece of cloth in her hand, revealing blood. Olachi jumped at the sight and quickly examined his sister for injuries, which made Olachi laugh. Oh no, I'm okay. The blood is not mine, it's from the nun. It's her menstrual flow, she explained. Olachi wrinkled his nose in disgust, and Olachi teased him. Men, what's so disgusting about a woman's menstrual flow? She asked, laughing. When the mood lightened, he asked why she was holding the cloth. Olachi explained that, I went to clean the nun's room as usual. I guess she was in a hurry for her meeting today and couldn't take proper care of it. It reminded me of my own predicament. I'm 24 and have yet to see my menstrual flow. Olachi felt sad for his sister, knowing how much it bothered her. Trying to cheer her up, he cracked a joke. You're lucky you don't have it. I feel pity for women sometimes. You have to deal with menstruation even when you're pregnant. Imagine that. Olachi laughed. You men are so ignorant. A woman can't be pregnant and menstruating at the same time. Everything Olachi said didn't make sense to Olachi. Why was Amara menstruating if she was pregnant? He asked his sister repeatedly, and she gave him the same answer each time. Still unsatisfied, Olachi immediately left his home to meet a female friend and randomly asked her the same question. She gave him the same answer as Olachi. Olachi became furious. He went to find Amara, and when he saw her, he pulled her aside and looked her straight in the eyes. Why did you pull me like that? Remember, I'm carrying your baby, Amara complained. What baby? You're a liar, he answered. He confronted her with what he had discovered, and from the look on Amara's face, he confirmed that she had indeed lied about the pregnancy. I'm sorry, Amara begged, almost in tears. I just wanted you to love me. But he wasn't having it. He demanded that she leave the village that night and abandon the prayer event scheduled for later that month. Amara refused, as she wanted the gifts the villagers would bring her. When she realized Olachi was serious about her leaving, she felt she had no other option but to threaten him. I told you I ran away from home. These gifts are how I fend for myself. If you insist that I leave today, I'll tell the villagers you took advantage of me, she threatened. Olachi became very scared. He could not risk tarnishing his family's image, so he immediately walked away from Amara. But he knew he had to deal with her somehow. That night, as Olachi lay deep in thought, the solution finally came to him. He would take away Amara's freedom by leading her father, the great King of Ukali, to her so she could marry the old suitor as originally planned. 2 days later, Olachi set off for Ukali. Amara thought he had traveled to avoid her, so she immersed herself in the upcoming prayer event, planning every detail carefully. 3 days after Olachi left, he arrived in Ukali and sought an audience with the king. He told the guards it was about the king's daughter. They were puzzled but went ahead and informed the king, who immediately granted him access. The King of Ukali was infamous for his brutal killings, but in recent years, he had calmed down after the death of his son and daughter in a war, both of whom he had loved dearly. As Olachi explained that the king's daughter, who had run away from Ukali, was hiding in another village, the king listened with keen interest. When Olachi finished, the king thanked him for bringing such important information and rewarded him. Olachi provided detailed directions to his compound and the nun's hut, then went on his way. He thought it was an innocent transaction, but unfortunately, the king had other plans. He felt that people were using his pain to mock him. "Have they forgotten how terrible I am?" he screamed at his guards. Determined to send a message, the king decided to make an example of Amara. Less than a week after Olachi left, the king sent his guards to capture her in the middle of the night and transport her back to him. She was locked in a prison for days and eventually brought out to an open space where a crowd had gathered. Amara looked around and her eyes met with the Kings of Ukali. As she scanned the crowd and her surroundings, she saw a freshly dug grave and immediately knew it was hers. She began to cry and beg, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Then the king stood up and addressed his people. "We have the dead walking among us. The princess of Ukali must be sent back to her grave where she belongs," he shouted. Some people cheered, while others wept, knowing her fate. "Let this be a warning to those who think the king of Ukali has become weak," he continued. As soon as Amara heard the word Ukali, she screamed in tears, knowing exactly why she was there. The guards dragged her to the grave and began to cover it. Amara screamed for mercy, but it was too late, because her fate had been decided by one who showed no mercy. Far away in Olachi's village, news had spread about the strange men who came for the nun in the night. Olachi was very sad. Often she stayed indoors, pitying herself, but continuously offering prayers to God. It was the first time she had intentionally prayed directly to God. One evening, her brother realized he hadn't seen her all day, so he went in to give her some food and discovered she had a high temperature. So he encouraged her to stand up and take a bath. "Olem, I'm sure you'll feel better when you come out," he said, helping her up from the bed. To his surprise, he saw blood stains on the bed. He quickly alerted his sister, and she too was shocked. Olachi ran into the bathroom to confirm her suspicion. "Olachi, it has come," she screamed from the bathroom. God had heard her prayers, and she realized she didn't need to please anyone for God to listen. He answered her because he gives good gifts to his children. The moral lesson of this story is, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness. This proverb warns against the foolishness of not learning from one's mistakes. Instead of growing wiser and changing their ways, fools are depicted as being stuck in a cycle of repeating their errors, much like the dog with its vomit. When people ignore the grace or mercy of God, which sometimes serve as warning signs, they have only themselves to blame for it. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. Thank you for watching this story today. Let me know what you learned in the comment section, and if you enjoyed it, please like and share with your loved ones. Till next time, goodbye.